So it's so wonderful to see all of you here this afternoon. It's been a great response. My name is Arlette Preston. I am a member of the City Commission, and I have the public health portfolio as part of my job. So this whole issue of homelessness and all of the work that the health department does is part of what I'm involved in. So glad that you're here. Obviously, there's interest in this topic and concern about homelessness, and knowing that and seeing the number of people that are here, I know it's something that we can tackle as a community and solve it. So this morning, we had a session. And I'll introduce him a little bit later. The expert that we have brought in presented to about 50 elected officials and staff. It was wonderful. Good response, lots of questions, a lot of back and forth. And I think it's probably giving us some really good ideas about direction. So this event is the second one. There's a third one tonight at 7 o'clock at the Fargo Theater, and then another one tomorrow morning with downtown businesses. So hopefully from all of that, we will come out of this with a much better idea of how to approach this. And hopefully with the goal of making sure everybody is in a house and is warm and safe. So we were fortunate, Jan Eliason, who is the Director of Harm Reduction in the Department of Health, is the person that has, and her staff, have brought in an individual from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, James Matthey. He is the housing administrator for the Milwaukee County. And the reason he's being brought in is they've had a lot of success in addressing this issue in Milwaukee. He's been a driving force in leading the Milwaukee area to a 45% reduction in overall homelessness since 2015. Milwaukee County is on track to be the largest county in the nation to end chronic homelessness. So, chronic homelessness is a public health issue, and we can truly solve this by working together. So James is going to lay some groundwork, some road path, some path for us to follow. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can everybody hear me okay? No? Yes? We're good? Okay. Excellent. Thank you all for being here today. Just as I said this morning, this is an amazing turnout, and it was this morning as well. I've been fortunate enough to speak to communities around the country. I have never seen this level of engagement from local leaders, from the mayor's office. So thank you, Mayor Mahoney and your team. And to see this sort of public interest in this to make a difference is something I'm not used to seeing. So congratulations to you all for your efforts and hopefully what we can do. So I'm going to talk today about some of the things that we've done in Milwaukee County to reduce homelessness, and certainly think that is replicable here. So we're going to go over some recommendations for Fargo, but kind of walk through how we did things in Milwaukee, and hopefully we can bring that here. So again, I'm James Matthey. I'm the administrator of the Milwaukee County Housing Division. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what that means in our area to introduce myself, as well as kind of show how we built this for our progress. So a little bit of Milwaukee County. We're a little under 1 million for population. Very diverse, and that has been good or bad for our statistics. So the diversity part is great. What we struggle with, a big focus of our county budget is using the lens of racial equity, which is very, very important to us. So our population was only 27% African American. It is about 75 to 80% of our homeless population is African American, which is a horrible statistic. So our county executive really leads with, from a budgetary perspective of investing in equity. That has certainly made a big difference for housing and prevention and the focus on homelessness to really help better those statistics. So here's the areas of service, and I talked about this morning. So fortunate in our community, everything you see here is under our divisions control. Here in Fargo, there might be 4 or 5 different directors or individuals or levels of government that have these programs. But you can kind of remember this slide later. This is the beginning of the folks that need to be in the room working together here in Fargo to start off with. So we were fortunate enough many, many years ago, about 20 years ago, Milwaukee County formed its own housing division. And the reason they did that at the time, there was a series of articles in the paper about poor housing conditions for people in our behavioral health system. And it was Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. What the county did, and that county executive at the time, was take our block grant programs and our housing authority and everything that was in 3 or 4 different departments and form this housing division to solve that problem. So we were very fortunate to be able to do that. And the unique thing is my division area is under the Department of Health and Human Services. So all of our housing programs, our block grant programs, are all thinking about social determinants of health and the lens of housing as healthcare, which is a little unique for housing programs. I don't think 20 years ago they thought we'd be talking like this, so it's a little bit of an accident. But for our homeless programs and our Housing First programs worked very, very well. So again, the community development block grant funds, so that's going to be funds that even come to Fargo for everything from bus shelters to senior meal programs to economic development programs, hoping low to moderate income citizens, our home program for affordable housing development, Milwaukee County Continuum Care Program, so that's going to be rental assistance programs and services directly for homeless individuals. And our big one is the Milwaukee County Housing Authority. So as I mentioned this morning, this is a super important topic across the country dealing with homelessness. A lot of our progress was due to us operating our own housing authority. And again, I think we're the only housing authority in the country that is under a level of government, but also in a human services department. And we run our housing authority that way. And it's very different. We put a homeless preference in our housing authority, and a lot of our vouchers are now going to people directly off the street through our internal programs linked to our services and those different types of things. Eviction and homeless prevention, just like in Fargo, we were fortunate to have a lot of federal funds that unfortunately are not here anymore, but they were the past 2 years with emergency rental assistance and those types of programs, so we weave those into our homeless programs. Real estate development, we develop permanent supportive housing, not just for homeless folks, but we do partnerships with private developers building affordable housing in the city and in our suburbs, gap financing, everything related to financing and affordable housing. Energy assistance, we operate the energy assistance program. And then our outreach services and Housing First, we did not have this program at all until 2014. The county was not a leader in homelessness. We didn't necessarily even see it as our issue. So now fast forward to today, all of these programs, to be honest, our main mission is homelessness. That's what we decided to focus on. So all of these different levels are feeding in to our Housing First program. So what is Housing First? When I say the term Housing First, can you raise your hand if you've heard of the concept? Fantastic. That's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Housing First is and what it isn't. So the idea of Housing First is really when you look at this slide here, so this is kind of the old treatment version of what housing used to be, and it's what our community looked like up until 2014, where it used to be individuals would be on the street, and the goal would be to try to get them in shelter, and once they were in shelter and stable, they'd go to transitional housing, and once they went to transitional, if they met all the rules and qualifications and did the right things, then they would be offered permanent housing. So that is the way most systems work, and it's the way ours worked up until 2014. So the idea with Housing First is we should be skipping all that. So if an individual is unsheltered or in a shelter or in transitional housing, they're still homeless. So if the goal is reducing homelessness, the true Housing First programs that work the best, we're going to take individuals directly off the street and permanently have them exit homelessness directly into permanent housing and skip everything in between. And when we talk about Housing First, it is not housing only. This is housing with intense supportive services to make sure that individuals maintain their housing. There's certainly Housing First in some states have gotten a bad rap, but if you learn what their Housing First programs are, they are not true Housing First programs. So we're going to talk about today is the fidelity of what this looks like, how to do it the right way, and doing it the right way, you can guarantee the results of decreases in homelessness. So a couple key principles. Again, this is immediate access to housing, and this is housing without preconditions. So individuals that are homeless, regardless if they're having mental health acuity issues, addiction issues, employment issues, whatever that is, everybody deserves the dignity of housing. So again, we're going to offer housing with voluntary services. And the way I like to explain this to you all, you can imagine if you have medical issues or income issues or employment issues, addiction issues, and we're going to ask you to focus on all that while you're sleeping under the bridge in a tent. None of us are able to do that. You need the foundation and the safety of permanent housing to take a breath, feel safe, and then focus on all these things. So everyone in our Housing First program is offered voluntary services. And those services have to be there to get good fidelity in these programs. And again, it's about permanently ending someone who cycles homelessness as quickly as possible. So solution-focused case management. I'll go through our case management model here. I do want to shout out Jan and her group. There's some really good services here in Fargo, some of which I don't even have, I have to say. So the bones of some really good programs are here. So again, our case management is voluntary, and our clients determine what that means to them. Case management does not mean the same thing to you or me. An individual should choose what that treatment is for them. So improved health outcomes. We're looking at reductions in homelessness, but everything else. We're talking improvement in quality of life. Children not moving school district to school district, medical issues, addiction issues, all those different types of things. Social and community integration, making sure that those we serve are a part of our community, not separate, not in a separate building, but really a part of the community, involving consumers in your policy, what that looks like, having them side by side as you make decisions. The biggest thing is no discharges back into homelessness. So if we take somebody off the street into their own apartment, 100% of the time, does that first apartment work when they've never lived on their own apartment before? Nope, it might not. But if a true Housing First program, if it's the first housing placement's gonna fail, they cannot end up back on the street. So if you're doing homeless outreach where we are, it doesn't make any sense to put somebody into a house, have them evicted, and have our outreach workers working with them on the street again. So even if it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 apartments, if you stick with it and do this the correct way, individuals will be successfully housed. Cost savings with housing retention, this is an important thing I'll talk about later. When done right, this is an immense cost saver to taxpayers, an immense cost savers to your health systems, private hospitals, all that different data. We have data all over the place to show that this is just not the right thing to do from a mission perspective for those we serve, but also it's a very good cost saver. And then housing-focused street outreach. So we do our own street outreach, which is different for government. I'm happy to say that that's the way it is in Fargo. Most governments don't do direct street outreach. It's usually nonprofits or volunteer groups, so we do our own homeless outreach and then directly connect it to housing. But our outreach is always about housing. So if we meet an individual and it's somebody in a tent down by the river, right away we're talking housing. And 99 times out of 100, that person's gonna say that's what they need. There's short-term needs of food and sleeping bags and things like that. We want to talk housing, and we want to talk about immediately placing that person into housing to meet their needs and permanently end their cycle of homelessness. So our homeless outreach is focused 100% on housing placement. So this is just, again, a slide about how we look at kind of move in to move on. So there's going to be a whole different path to what this is, based on what each client wants. And their paths are always very, very different. It could be neighborhood choice, it could be case management choice, whatever that happens to be. Everything has to be low barrier. So there's certainly some low barrier programs that do a wonderful job here in Fargo. You want to bring people in where they're at and not force them to be in programs to fit your own needs. So everything with Housing First is truly based on what each individual client wants. Support and recovery, consistent follow-up. A lot of this is trust building with individuals who have seen the system fail them time after time and year after year. And a lot of it is about building those trusting relationships, especially when somebody's never been housed before. Tonight, there's going to be a brief video of some of our work where our client says, you know, so this apartment is mine and you're going to help me pay for it and it's permanent. And he's like, no, that's not permanent. Something's going to happen. But individuals have struggled for a lot of times, especially those with mental health challenges, that don't believe these programs are actually real. But the more you work with individuals, you build that trust, you do the follow-up, decent services, and it leads to our success rates. So again, following up on this, what you'll see here is kind of how all of our programs kind of meld together. And it talks about where most of our folks live. So there's a certain subset of who we deal with where maybe they just need a security deposit and short-term rent assistance, what a lot of us would call rapid rehousing, maybe 3 or 4 months of rent assistance, that's all they need. They're not struggling with a lot of mental health issues. They find their job and they don't need our system at all. So for us, that's going to be kind of the shorter-term rental assistance. And we also have permanent supportive housing. So for us, that is going to be, it might be a building that's called permanent supportive housing where we subsidize the rent. We have services right in the building to help individuals with that, and it's all in one building, so we have a certain percentage of individuals like that. But a lot of our progress is done what's called scattered site housing. We're taking a rent assistance voucher, giving it to someone who's homeless, and they determine where they live. And it's not just a building where those people live. They get to choose where to take that voucher for any landlord in Milwaukee County that we work with. And that's a majority of where our folks live. They choose where they're going to live. And that was the benefit of us embedding all of our housing authority vouchers directly to our Housing First program. So our homeless outreach workers have vouchers in their hand prioritized by our housing authority. Just learning what Jan's work is, the services are there and they're really good. But if you don't have that immediate access to housing, that's where this stuff doesn't work. So that's part of what we have to figure out here in Fargo, how to do that. A majority of our progress has been through our own housing authority. So this is more of kind of a graph of what that looks like. And even with a lot of our shorter term rental assistance, things happen. So we might believe that an individual might just need 3 months of rent assistance, but what if that doesn't work? And what if they lose their job? And what if they can't pay their rent, or they have an addiction issue come up, or mental health issues? What are those individuals going to do? In a true Housing First program, those people cannot just return to homelessness, or we're right back where we came from as a community. So everything, even in our short term, if needed, is going to feed into our long-term vouchers. So that's what's called a move-on initiative. So in our housing authority, the way we wrote up our plan, an individual can move on from short-term rent assistance directly to a housing authority voucher once they exit that first program. So a lot of this is programs you all have here that just aren't quite fitting together yet, but the resources are there. So again, short-term is fine. Sometimes folks need to transition from that short-term to that long-term, and that's a majority of what we do, either through our continuum of care rental assistance or our Section 8 rental assistance. And again, even a lot of individuals that move to our housing authority vouchers also get those voluntary services if they need it. So the great thing about being here in Fargo is this looks very, very similar to what kicked us off in Milwaukee, except there's more energy here than there was in Milwaukee, to be honest. So how we started, it was around 2014. It was as basic as I got a call from the county executive. We didn't have a big homeless crisis. I would argue you don't have here either. You have a homeless problem like we did, but it's not at crisis level. There's good work being done here, and we were doing good work too. He just called on a Friday night saying, if we just blew up the homeless system and did something really big, what would that look like? And that's kind of all he said. So we kind of got together as a staff to try to figure out what that was going to look like. And just like we talked about here, we talked about ending chronic homelessness. And there were a few different reasons to look at that. And in 2014, as I mentioned, the county was not a leader in homelessness. City of Milwaukee runs our continuum of care. We did some programs, but we weren't running, we had no homeless outreach. We weren't involved in this at all. But he had the political will to put a stake in the ground to say, if you guys give me a plan that I believe in and I think that can work, we'll do that. So we did this plan to end chronic homelessness. And our numbers, your numbers here are way lower than even ours were when we started. So what you have here is certainly solvable. So we had around 200 chronically homeless individuals, 55 of those unsheltered. As our data got better, just as you would probably find out, your numbers are probably higher than you think they were. So the need was even bigger than we thought it was going to be. So again, we're going to start with the most difficult to house, and those were going to be folks that were unsheltered, folks with serious mental health issues, probably living in our downtown area, unhoused, where the businesses are unhappy and citizens are unhappy, and we heard about it all the time. So we had the goal of doing 100 placements in the first 12 months, and then 300 placements in the first 3 years. As I mentioned, our numbers were way higher than that. We served way more than 300, and there were way more people to serve than we thought. So here's kind of the major themes of approach, and keep these in mind when we talk about Fargo. So the biggest one, we talk all the time that housing ends homelessness. And it sounds simple, but it is true. This should be about permanent housing and ending someone's cycle of homelessness, and the biggest way to do that is housing subsidy. All homeless individuals, regardless of their challenges, probably have very little income. Rents are rising, vacancy rates are awful in Fargo like they are in Milwaukee. So the number one thing you have to do is increase your supply of affordable housing. Building affordable housing is certainly important. I think the mayor said we're short 15,000 units in Fargo. It's even worse than Milwaukee. So part of it is the long-term strategy of building affordable housing. But what are we going to do right now? And we have to figure out those different housing subsidies, what's here, what needs to work better, what we need to improve on. And again, case management services, flexible services are super important. So we have two different forms of case management that I'll go over later. Our Housing First case management, which is very client focused. We don't bill Medicaid. It's completely up to our clients. And there's some clients that need way more assistance than that. They may need to be seen 7 days a week, 2 times a day, and we need to move them to a different area of case management in Milwaukee County that I'll talk about later. So additional supportive housing developments. I'm sure there's a shortage of units here where there's subsidized buildings with services on site and 24 hours a day. So that's a part of this as well. Outreach and staffing, you guys are off to a great start on outreach. So that's looking really good already. And the biggest thing is the coordination of resources and the wide range of community partners. The great thing about this morning is there was about 25 stakeholders in that room, and everybody has to help. So when there's a plan we're coming out with, it's not just about the city of Fargo. It's not just about the housing authority. It's hospital systems, it's United Way, it's you all as community members, it's business owners. Everybody plays a part in this. There's not enough federal resources to solve homelessness. There's not enough city resources to fill the gaps on that. This all has to be done as a community. And I think we were able to demonstrate that. So our first initial investments, I'm going to kind of go over our first partners. So financially, we were able to get $1 million to get started. And I told the mayor's staff, don't get freaked out by our numbers. We're a very big community, so our investments were pretty high. That might not need to be the case here in Fargo. But we started with a $1 million investment from our county executive through the Milwaukee County Behavioral Health Division. And if you remember, I lead the housing division. That was not my division. And the money came from them over to us, which at first they didn't like a whole lot. But I'll get into why all of a sudden they thought it was a good idea. So the city of Milwaukee, again, we're county of Milwaukee, county government. The city of Milwaukee came in with $500,000 of tenant-based rental assistance. These numbers have ballooned way more than that now, but that's what we started with. And again, we didn't have any Housing First programs. We didn't do any homeless outreach, even in 2024. This was all, or 2014, this was all brand new to us. So hired a manager to run all of our Housing First programs, a program evaluator. Looking back, this was probably one of the smart things that we did. Our program evaluator's job was just to do data, best practice work, data, cost savings, working with criminal justice statistics, mental health statistics, healthcare statistics, to prove what we know across the country, Housing First works. But sometimes in order to sell those kinds of programs, you have to have the local data as well. So his job was just to do that local data. And then starting our street outreach team and housing navigators. So again, our street outreach is housing focused. So our outreach workers are doing housing navigation to get folks directly into permanent housing. So I mentioned flexible services. So there's a couple different ways that we looked at that. So out of that first $1 million, we did Housing First case management. That was funded by local county property tax levy, which is not easy to get. And we wanted that. The reason we did that, this isn't about Medicaid. It's not about fitting our clients into a box of funding. It was completely case management on their own terms. So some of our clients, they didn't have transportation. They wanted bus tickets. And due to their addiction issues, they lost touch with their family. They wanted to reconnect with their family. Other folks wanted intensive case management and be rehooked up with a psychiatrist and all those different types of things. We let our clients decide for them what they wanted. What they really wanted was housing. And if we, of course, wanted them in mental health treatment, and we'll get to that eventually, but let's do the housing part first. So that's why we had no billing expectations. We weren't chasing down billable hours and trying to get clients to do what we wanted them to do. So a lot of what we talked about, if there's shelter providers in the room, of course, we got a few bad looks from shelter providers because all I'm talking about is permanent housing, permanent housing, permanent housing. And shelter providers are saying, well, we've been doing this work a long time. We've been doing good work. And yes, you are doing good work. And we have continued to fund our shelters. We've always funded homeless shelters, never cut their funding $1. But it was about, can we imagine a world, instead of you being a homeless shelter, that you're a homeless provider and a housing provider and a service provider. So they were originally just shelter providers. Now they're doing case management, and we're doing fidelity tools with them. Now they're running housing programs and permanent housing programs, and we're able to kind of take their shelter agencies and transform them into something else, and now they're even in better fiscal situations than they were. But we had all of our initial contracts go to those shelter agencies to try to build that capacity. So as I mentioned before, our Housing First caseloads are larger than your typical Housing First programs. They might be 20 to 1, and those are for individuals that don't need a lot of case management. Oftentimes that does not work. So when you're looking at Housing First fidelity, you might want 1 to 12 caseloads. We're fortunate enough in our org chart, when I mentioned we're in the Department of Health and Human Services, one of our divisions is housing, the other is behavioral health. So our behavioral health division handles all of the mental health treatment in Milwaukee County. So if an individual's failing in our light touch level of case management, they transition onto ACT teams, which are very low caseloads, very intensive case management. And we built that relationship, and we can go back and forth. And if an individual's at that low caseload, they're seeing 7 days a week, they're doing good, they're in their apartment, maybe they start working, they don't need that level, they come back to us, and we kind of feed each other with that to make sure our clients get what they need. So the nice thing about what we have going on this year, we finally, for the first time through the state of Wisconsin, are going to be able to bill Medicaid for housing services. That's housing placement, all those different types of things that we use local tax levy for the first time. We can start billing Medicaid for housing services that our clients want, take that cost savings to tax levy, reinvest it into prevention programs is what we're going to be trying to do. So, and this is similar to what we're going to be doing tomorrow. I'm meeting with several of the business leaders tomorrow. Two of our first partners, and it sounds odd, but there's a reason for it. Our first two partners are really our downtown business district and our district attorney's office. So what they were finding, and then the police department as well, a lot of frustration in downtown Milwaukee about homelessness and what they thought was homelessness, which really wasn't homelessness, but really frustrated on seeing the same individuals downtown that were homeless, individuals with warrants. The police would arrest individuals on warrants, they'd pay a fine, take folks to jail. 2 days later, they're back downtown over and over and over and over again. And it just was not working. Police were frustrated, days were frustrated, our businesses were beyond frustrated. So when we discussed our plan in chronic homelessness using Housing First, they decided to give this a shot. And we had this business symposium, just like we're going to have tomorrow, with all of our local business leaders to say this is a new approach. You haven't heard about this before. We're going to educate you. We're going to talk about not criminalizing homelessness, but at the same time, you're going to hold us accountable to our outcomes. You're going to hold government accountable to reductions in homelessness. And that's kind of what kicked this into gear. So we unveiled our plan, asked businesses to at least support us in theory, and hopefully leading to some fundraising later on. So this initial partnership was with ourselves and our downtown business district. But we were having regular weekly meetings with our police department, the downtown business district, my team, our outreach team, and city attorneys and folks in the Department of Transportation that operated land under the bridges. And we would meet every single week talking about the individuals we're all concerned about, even down to individual names, how long they've been homeless and what that looked like, with the idea of we're not going to have law enforcement and we're not going to make homelessness a criminal activity. All those individuals are going to be focused into our program, into Housing First for homelessness, and then they will not be homeless downtown anymore. And that worked very, very well. We developed just an amazing partnership. I was saying I wish our downtown business leader was able to join tomorrow. She could give this Housing First presentation, and she runs our downtown business district. It's really impressive, and they've been really supportive. But the reason they are is that we took a lot of people that were homeless downtown, and if you would look at downtown Milwaukee, there are no tents downtown anymore at all. But it was a lot of because of this partnership. So the other thing that we did with this, and we talked a little bit about this morning, and I will again tomorrow to the business leaders. So there needs to be a lot of education around homelessness and what homelessness is and isn't. So unfortunately, for those in the public that just have never been around individuals that are homeless, there's this assumption that if something bad is going on downtown, it's got to be somebody that's homeless. We see this type of behavior, it has to be a homeless person, and more than half the time it's actually not. So there's a lot of that communication about what that looks like. So when we're working with businesses, the district attorney, the city's attorney's office, if it is a homeless issue, call us first. We're not going to be writing tickets. We're not going to be criminalizing that situation. We're going to move people into housing, give them services, and they will not be downtown anymore in that situation. But we'd also get calls with what they would call, public nuisance behaviors, and say, hey, your client is downtown, and we would go down there like, this person is not homeless, they have housing, they don't receive our services at all, and that's a different conversation. But that issue has to be dealt with too, as far as citizens and what downtowns look like, and that's where the community prosecutor came in. So community prosecutors are basically, within a district attorney's office, they have the ability to charge individuals with certain crimes and things like that. We had our own community prosecutor in downtown that worked hand in hand with our outreach team, even did homeless outreach with us as a part of the district attorney's office. And that goal was to separate what might be criminal behavior that has nothing to do with homelessness at all, that's a public safety issue, and if it's not, they're going our direction through our Housing First program. So again, it's a very unique partnership with our criminal justice folks and our police. But our community prosecutor, a lot of communities don't have community prosecutors, and this individual is just working with downtown in the very specific business district, and really made a big difference as well. And it helped to educate businesses on not all criminal behavior is homeless in a downtown area, and it really helped with education around that as well. So what this eventually led to, we started most of our Housing First work in downtown. We had one major encampment that they didn't criminalize anybody that's there. We gave permanent housing to every single person, and the businesses noticed. And that's kind of what started a lot of our fundraising and working with other business owners. And now they have the downtown business district 100% pays the salary of a government worker to be a downtown homeless outreach coordinator. So the bid pays 100% of her salary. She's on my team at the county housing division, and her boundaries are the business district. So any business or anybody that has a homeless issue, you call Beth. And if you're a District 1 police officer, you call Beth. Everything gets routed to us, and since they're paying her salary, she's within their boundaries. It's really been spectacular. So Beth goes to all of the downtown bid meetings. She works hand in hand with the public ambassadors that walk the streets picking up garbage. We brand each other's stuff. We're all a part of one team. and very visual with that. So one of the things that we found right away when we started Housing First, he likes to go by the nickname Grizzly. He's on my screen there. When we started this, Grizzly was homeless for 25 years. And that wasn't a made-up number. We were able to verify that. The first folks we were housing had been homeless forever. Some visible, some not visible. He was living in the woods where probably no one can find him. But we expanded our outreach. We were able to find him. And again, not in a shelter, moved him directly into his own apartment. But the first 85 or 100 individuals had been homeless forever. So that's really where we started. And I'll show you where we're at now. It's just a dramatic different situation that we're in. So what we were able to start with, I mentioned that first $1 million investment and what that looks like. So as you're trying to raise additional money from various different partners, and the Behavioral Health Division giving me the stink eye of taking $1 million from them, we started looking at their data. So we looked at the first 85 individuals we served in Housing First, and this chart kind of goes through that. So just for 85 people, and now we've served thousands. For those 85 people, we saved the Behavioral Health Division of Milwaukee County almost $715,000 in 1 year. That's not Medicaid money. That's not criminal justice money. That's not private money. That's just the services that behavioral health within the county served just for those 85 individuals. So that paid for their investment right off the bat. And that made a really big difference. So this is, for us, it was crisis mobile team detox beds. Our clients didn't go to detox ever again. Saved a lot of money there. Psychiatric crisis services, inpatient services. Milwaukee County was one of the few counties that actually operated its own psych hospital until recently. Individuals would cycle in and out of our psychiatric hospital because they're homeless. And it was really silly looking back. That's the way the system is and the way a lot of other communities are. But we focused first on the cost savings to them. The other thing we did is spent a ton of time trying to figure out what our criminal justice costs were in our community. So we worked with all of our law enforcement officials, district attorney, and put very significant data to really what the cost of all these different services are. And criminal justice costs are extraordinarily high. Even just with police calls, you could think about dispatch and all that time and ambulances, all those different types of things. So we broke down the amount of money per case in all of these different areas from EMS and detox and jail and DA time and put a cost to that. But we also tracked a lot of our individuals that the police didn't want to deal with anymore. Tons of municipal citations over and over and over and over again. So our biggest data point that got the rest of our criminal justice folks involved was this one. So 98% of our first cohort were heavily involved in municipal court with municipal citations 12 months prior to entry, and those were all happening downtown. When you look at 12 months after our program, that went down to 9%. So the cost savings from my first slide to that second slide, that's a tremendous cost savings. So that first slide with the Behavioral Health Division and the $715,000 of savings, that did catch the attention of our healthcare partners and our local HMOs. So a lot of our clients were going in and out of private hospitals and emergency rooms. Many of them had Medicaid coverage through our HMOs, but was costing our HMOs a fortune and what they would call their high utilizers of their services. So we started talking to them based on our initial data with our Behavioral Health Division to get them interested in what we talk about now all the time is housing as healthcare. So a lot of their individuals that were costing them a lot of money were homeless in the emergency rooms all the time. So we struck up a relationship with them where our local HMOs, again, strange to hear, just like our business district, are paying government workers to do housing navigation, to do housing placements for people in their HMOs and private hospital systems. So they pay for all that work, they pay for our staff, and they pay for short-term rental assistance. So for us, it's $585,000. One of the things I make fun of them for is everyone I list there, they all compete against each other, and they will not let me talk to you about their individual data because it's all NDA and they're all competitors. but they all invest. And that's fine by us. So what one of them said was, okay, we'll try this out. We want a 3-to-1 return on our investment. So if we give you $100,000, you have to guarantee, for whatever reason, you have to save us at least $300,000 for that investment. And that was many years ago, and that initial $100,000 is what you see now for $585,000 and growing. It is way beyond a 3-to-1 cost savings of straight dollars for our healthcare agencies. They were there this morning. Healthcare agencies have to be a part of this solution. There's a lot of money there. It's the right thing to do, but there's also a ton of cost savings with homeless individuals accessing expensive medical services that could simply be met with a better housing program. Resident Advisory Council. So I feel even silly bringing this up with Jan's group because they even do a better job than we do with this. The voice of the individuals you serve have to be at the table developing every single one of your programs. It's super important. Communities miss it all the time. It's not the case here in Fargo, but our Resident Advisory Council is really, really important to us. So these are individuals who were all unsheltered homeless for many, many years that are now our advisory council, and we take it serious enough where we actually pay them for their time. All of our RFPs for our county contracts are vetted through and scored by our advisory council, and we pay them for all that time. We have a member of our advisory council on the Milwaukee Continuum of Care Board of Directors. So everything we try to do is within the lens of those we serve. We have dramatically changed our contracting process based on the feedback we got from them. So it's not just about the token of having people at the table. They have to be in a position of power to actually change and affect the programs that you run. And again, your outcomes will be better for that. So our current street outreach, at this moment, we grew from just first shift to also second shift. So we're out Monday through Friday. We do some late night shift, early morning shifts. So it helps dramatically of finding out who's truly homeless, who's truly out there at 2 in the morning versus somebody at a meal site. Again, it helped the community really understand who's homeless and who is not and what that looks like. So we're again out and about all the time. I do like to tell the story. My deputy director for all the housing that I do was a street outreach worker for us at first, and our housing authority director was a street outreach worker before he worked in our housing authority. So it all ties together as a division to this work. So even though we do a lot of stuff internally, a lot of our work is contracted to different nonprofits. These are just examples of all the different services that we are tying into Housing First: domestic violence, crisis housing, street case management, payee-ship programs, student housing for our technical college. These are all different contracts that we do. Right to counsel, something we're really, really proud of. We finally were able to start investing some money in prevention services, making sure that individuals in eviction court had legal representation. Never were able to do that before. We were always in crisis mode and not getting to the root cause of poverty, the root cause of homelessness. We were finally able to start doing that. But this is just an example of those contracts. And the important thing for us is every one of our contracts are performance-based contracts. We're not going to be giving money to shelters or other organizations to do business as usual. If we're funding homeless shelters, we want to know, do they all have individual plans? How long have they been here? What's the housing plan look like? And we hold them accountable to those performance-based metrics in every single contract that we had. Examples of that are important to us: 90% of all clients will remain in permanent housing. Again, you don't want individuals in a Housing First program returning to homelessness. Really important. Also, certified peer specialists are very important to the work that we do. Individuals that have been through recovery with lived experience are the ones providing a lot of our services. That's important, and we want to make sure that those we contract with have individuals like that on their staff as well. So here's kind of some of the data about where we are, and we're a little competitive about it. So hopefully Fargo gets a little competitive about their numbers as well. So we have seen a dramatic decrease in homelessness. So the best example of that, up from when we started Housing First through 2022, saw a 92% reduction in unsheltered homelessness, which is what kind of blew our minds a little bit. But those numbers were absolutely true. Our point in time count numbers were 17 and 18. And again, we have 1 million people with high poverty rates in Milwaukee County. So we were proud about that. We've kind of went around from first to second and third as far as our ranking across the country. And again, proud of my staff because we're super competitive. So we went from number 1 and number 2 and bothered us quite a bit. So you will see though that our numbers, and this is important for folks in Fargo to know, Fargo has seen an increase in homelessness just like we have, just like every single city in America has. If you look at numbers in 2023, it's going up everywhere. So it's not just you. I'd like to think our programs are pretty good. We've seen an increase too. So you can see on our chart, even going from 18 to 96, again, 96 individuals is still a pretty low number for a community our size, but we still saw an increase. And if you're running these programs the right way and you're holding each other accountable on that reduction in homelessness, you better tool something, you better do something different to maintain where you are, or things can kind of spiral out of control. So a couple other data points, 0 chronically homeless individuals unsheltered for the past 2 years. So we have no chronically homeless folks on our streets at all. 97% housing retention rate, 97%. And that is what speaks to the true fidelity of Housing First. You have to do it the right way, and you can't give up on people. And again, if their first or second placement doesn't work, you keep trying. You don't give up on people, or they just end up back on the street again. And again, this is scattered site, a ton of consumer choice. They get to decide their treatment, they get to decide where they live. And just like us, if we get to make those earned determinations, we will do better with our quality of life as well. And again, I mentioned a lot of what we do is in Milwaukee County is the focus of the lens of racial equity. So our numbers were awful for African American homelessness, so we were trying to tool a lot of what we did to get at that issue, and saw a 70% reduction in unsheltered homelessness for African American community, which is a really important goal for us. So I did mention the increase in homelessness, and our best guess is this slide, and this data looks almost exactly the same as in Fargo. The vacancy rates in Milwaukee County, our rental market got extraordinarily tight. So vacancy rates, for those of you that haven't heard this term, it's basically how many vacant apartments there are for any apartments in your community. We had one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country. It was extraordinarily difficult to find housing for our clients. I believe Fargo's, I think, is under 4%, 3 point some percent. Same issue you're dealing with here. Without that stock of housing, it makes this extraordinarily difficult. So we believe that was the cause of it. So we're going to try to figure out how to quickly pivot to that. And here's the decisions that we made. So each community got these Home American Rescue Plan Act funds from the federal government due to the stimulus programs that were available. So we decided we hired 4 housing navigators, and Jan's got these folks on their team. But the biggest problem we had is we thought we were doing the right thing by our homeless outreach workers also doing the housing process. They got pretty tired, and they weren't able to focus on street outreach because they were doing all the housing applications and all these different types of things. So we hired these navigators to separate our outreach workers who didn't have to do the housing process anymore with these 4 housing navigators that started the day after Labor Day in September. So that was our pivot to see what we were gonna see and our vacancy rates. So that's what we decided to do, is hire those 4 individuals that only did paperwork and housing placements. No case management, nothing else, just the housing process. And then we paired that with expanding tenant-based rental assistance. And the biggest thing, and we've talked a lot about this since I've been here, an expansion of our master lease program. So again, we're all short of affordable housing, but if you need units right now, and say there's a tent encampment in downtown Fargo and you want to house people right now, you can't wait around for a few years to develop affordable housing. So our solution to that is our master lease program. And what that is, it's a lease between landlords and us as a government housing division. Our tenants are not on a lease, we're on the lease. So we can go around to different landlords and say, would you like 100% of your rent paid for by government? I guarantee your payment on time. I'll pay your security deposit. I'll pay damage claims. I'll do all those different types of things. And the lease then is between our division and that landlord, and we can move in anybody we want to. We don't worry about background checks and credit checks and all those different types of things. People can stay there for a year, they could stay there for 2 weeks. We make those decisions. And all of a sudden, our outreach team had instant access to housing. We furnished the units, and we didn't have a lot of that before. And that was a game changer for us, because then we had to pivot. We saw our numbers going up, and this gave them kind of a steady stock of housing. So the last batch we did, 75 additional housing units, and we didn't have to wait any time to do that. We worked with our existing landlords, scattered site, not in one building, scattered all throughout Milwaukee County in different neighborhoods. So a client had a choice between south side, north side, east side, suburbs, whatever that happens to be, and worked with all of our landlords to do that. Again, short-term or long-term, fully furnished, we have the keys, we're ready to go, we're ready to house individuals. So the other thing that we did is we didn't have this when we started. We have our own landlord engagement coordinator, which is, again, separate than anything else. And if Connor was up here and you heard him talk, he talks like a real estate developer. Former reformed social worker, but speaks fluent landlord. So we're talking about recruiting landlords, retaining landlords, talking about their concerns, why they may want to work with us, why they might not. And it's all through the lens of making them more comfortable working with those we serve and explaining our program. And that, of course, made a big difference. So it led to better landlord retainment, speedier housing process. So our housing navigators, if they get involved with somebody on the street and there's 3 individuals on a move on the south side of Milwaukee, they can pick up the cell phone, call Connor and say, I need 3 south side units, what do we have? These 3 addresses, this vacancy, this much rent, we have a voucher here, we have a voucher there. And the landlord engagement coordinator is his only job. No caseloads, no anything else, just recruiting and retaining landlords. So a lot of this, and we do a lot of training around landlord engagement. A lot of times those of us that are in this work advocating for the rights of homeless individuals, we're all going to come on the tenant right side. I typically do that as well. Everyone in this room working with our clientele is going to look at it that way. It's different with true landlord engagement. You have to listen to landlords' concerns. We love our landlords. And they see this as a risky proposition that aren't familiar with working with this population. You have to see things on their terms and not your own, especially if you're a social worker. This is different. This is property management. It's making money, not losing money. We have to be comfortable playing in that circle, even if we're generally on the tenant right side. Developing personal relationships, trusting relationships. A lot of our landlords sometimes don't even know their tenants. They talk directly to us. The relationship is between the landlord and us. Doesn't even have to be your tenant. If there's a problem, you call us, we will fix it. If there's an eviction issue, our landlords don't want to evict individuals. In our Housing First program, there's no need to. So we're going to talk about what's called mutual lease terminations. Sorry, this isn't working out for the landlord. Will you agree not to evict this individual if we find a different housing placement? Joe, our client, would you agree to work on a different housing placement? Sign a document, mutual lease termination, we find a different unit, and there's no eviction on our client's record. Contact lists of landlords we're dying to work with, ones we are, ones we can't get to yet, and we kind of tier that system to gain more landlords. Tenant matching, we'll have our clients meet with different landlords to see, which ones we're more comfortable working with. There's some landlords that are going to be more strict than others. That's okay. So we're trying to kind of make those connections through that process. We started doing incentives for landlords. I know you all do some of this work as well. So we started kind of this landlord advisory council where it's my team. There's Connor in the picture with some of our real estate developers. It is an open forum for landlords to honestly tell us why our program doesn't work. Hear them out, change what we need to change. Honest conversations, and it has really led to the benefit of making our programs better because we absolutely need our landlords. So we did a lot with American Rescue Plan Act funds, which again were federal stimulus funds that every community got. We were very fortunate. Our county executive, he tells a pretty amazing story. He's very interested in housing. First African-American county executive in county history, lived in the poorest zip code almost in all the country. was evicted 3 times as a kid, went to multiple different schools, and this issue is deeply personal to him. So we were very fortunate to get a pretty large housing investment from Milwaukee County of ARPA funds. And it's where we started finally doing prevention work. I mentioned right to counsel before. Finally, we're able, especially with the emergency rental assistance funds from the Department of Treasury that every community got, finally got upstream. And I don't think it's any surprise that our homeless numbers were as low as they were, because we were finally getting at the root causes of poverty, all those things we dreamed about but didn't have the money to do. So that's an example of that. Flexible rental assistance. So talk all the time about it'd be wonderful if the federal government gave us all the resources we need for homelessness. It's not close, and nor will it be. There has to be local funds and all these different types of funds, and flexible funds. So HUD might pay with a rent assistance voucher, but how are you going to do furniture? How are you going to do a security deposit? How are you going to do all these different types of things? HUD doesn't pay for that. So this flexible rent assistance pot we got through the county executive and ARPA allowed us to determine what our clients need with rental assistance. It could be back rent, it could be anything, and we didn't define what that was. We let our case managers figure that out. We let our clients figure that out to maintain that high percentage of 97% success rate. We worked to one of Milwaukee's unfortunate claim to fames. We're super, super segregated. It's a bad situation in Milwaukee, so we've done a ton of real estate development, affordable housing in our suburban communities that have never seen affordable housing before, giving those we serve, not just for homelessness, but individuals that are low income, giving them access to our suburban communities, different school districts, those types of things. We've done a lot of home ownership programs now, and the development of crisis housing. So individuals that right that minute are in a traumatic situation, maybe it's a domestic violence situation, and they need to go somewhere right that minute. That is not a congregate shelter, and we need more than 5 minutes to find permanent housing. This crisis housing will give individuals a place to get out of that traumatic situation to then move into permanent housing, but we never had those types of resources before ARPA. So those prevention resources led to new conversations and a new partnership with United Way. So United Way is also a big partner of ours, and again, it is very rare for United Way and government to partner. United Way directly funds some of our government programs, which I don't think is done in most communities for United Way. But they took what we did with Housing First, the success of chronic homelessness, and imagine what if we took the work that the county did and then worked on family homelessness. And that's what they did. So we developed a plan with them, but United Way led this charge on ending family homelessness, using Housing First principles, involving our clients, and raising a ton of money for prevention programs, putting housing navigators in our public school system districts, funding eviction prevention programs, super flexible money, utility payments, all of these things that I can't afford to do with local tax levy, the federal government won't pay for, and the megaphone of United Way is way bigger than all of us had combined. And they raised millions of dollars through the Safe and Stable Homes Initiative with the goal of ending family homelessness. So when we looked at family homelessness, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness is basically the federal gatekeeper. You can't just say you ended things to do a political PR statement. There's about 58 criteria for ending family homelessness, and there should be. You could even argue there should be more than that. You can't just come out and say you did something. So we work with USICH on, can we imagine a world where we meet all 58 of those criteria? And just 2 months ago, United Way was able to declare that Milwaukee and Ozaki County were the first communities in the country to end family homelessness. And again, it's all just started with chronic, like you all are talking about, and just kept moving the needle, and then moved it to families. So super excited about that. It doesn't necessarily mean there's 0 people in our family shelters, but what it means is if some family becomes homeless, there's an immediate intervention with somebody maybe homeless for a day or two with a short-term placement and a permanent placement, and all those different usage criteria. So to be able to partner with something like United Way and our philanthropic groups is something we had never done before as government. So that made a big difference for us as well. So kind of leaving you with this. This is the list of community partners, and these partners in one form or another need to be at the table in Fargo as well. We believed that county government, in our respect, we needed to take on the leadership role and be held accountable on the issue of homelessness. We didn't have to, we chose to. But with us being local government leaders, we were able to have all these institutional partners at the table where maybe nonprofit agencies would never get at the same table too. So this is going to be our parks department for individuals who were sleeping in the parks, our sheriff's department, municipal courts, district attorney, Department of Transportation. These are all institutional government partners that had no idea what to do about homelessness, but really followed our plan as institutional partners and remain that way to this day. Resident Advisory Council, I mentioned Marquette University. Marquette University is located very close to downtown. We work hand in hand with them as well. Milwaukee County Furniture Bank, we operate our own furniture bank where we have furniture for individuals. We store all that furniture. We have relationships with different businesses to get those funded. Upstart Kitchen is a local nonprofit that was doing free meals for Housing First participants that we deliver to their apartments. A lot of the people we serve are zero income. Doesn't mean you can't house them, but how are we going to meet their needs with zero income? So we have all these different community partnerships as well. So to be successful, just to recap, here's the couple different things that's important. Again, it's got to be a public-private partnership. So again, it has to be city, county, state. It has to be philanthropic. It has to be business. It has to be faith-based. And you have to adopt a plan and all work together. Hopefully 2 years from now, you don't have to be debating about what you're going to do with homelessness. Every one of you know what that plan is and how to support it. Again, housing subsidy, I'd say that 8 million times. Clients that are homeless because they can't afford housing. And that's almost true across the board. Local funding, I mentioned, can't just rely on federal HUD funds, flexible case management. And then the bottom, so this is exactly what we're doing today, is educating the public on the plan and how this is gonna look different. So it's not just about community leaders or business people that are frustrated about homelessness. It's really all of you being educated on what homelessness is, what it isn't, what those solutions are, and who's in charge. So if our stuff is not working, we're in a lot of trouble. We're held accountable to that, and we embrace that. The recommendation to most communities is somebody should be in charge of making sure that this works and holding everybody accountable to what that plan looks like. How do we fail? Don't operationalize Housing First correctly. So this is an election year, and homelessness is a super important topic. That's what a lot of individuals are talking about. So there's certainly, if you Google Housing First, you're gonna find articles, negative articles about it. A lot of people that say they're doing this are not doing it correctly. And it's giving those of us that follow this fidelity tool a really bad name. This absolutely works, and it will work here, but you have to do it the right way. Assuming that just this change in philosophy will solve homelessness on its own, it will not. Housing First can't stop the inflow into a housing system. It manages the outflow. So we have to start talking prevention programs. It might take a little while to get there, but you have to get also at the root causes of poverty, the root causes of homelessness, and what that looks like. No short-term goals in the plan. So what a community doesn't want to hear is, well, we have a severe lack of housing, so over the next 10 years, we're going to build X amount of units. And you guys have to do that. But what about 3 months from now? And what about tents down by the river in our downtown situation? You have to have a quick action short-term plan that also mirrors your long-term plan. Bad data. We had really bad data 10 years ago. Your data is not as bad of a shape as where you guys, or where we were. The one thing I have noticed though, you have a lot of different smaller communities that kind of surround Fargo. Not exactly sure all these communities are working together the way they are yet, but we'll get there. And one of the challenges is shared data and what that looks like. You have communities that can't find a way to share their data together, even though it's 2 miles down the road. So that's a super important issue to this as well. And then not recognizing the effects of homelessness on stakeholders. So it's important if you're a homeless advocate, it is okay that you're talking to a business owner that's gonna talk dramatically different about our clients as you are. And that just has to be okay with everybody. If your perspective is you're going to agree to be at the table and you're going to agree to support a plan, even if it's about you saving money or making the downtown look more aesthetically pleasing, it's got to be okay to advocates to hear that, as long as you're all working on the same plan, working together, doing that investment, supporting each other, and holding each other accountable to a decrease in homelessness. So that is my presentation. Thank you. So we're certainly hoping, I think there's microphones out, so the rest of our time we're hoping for some excellent questions, microphone in the back. Please, comments, questions, frustrations, things you would like to see, things you haven't seen. So please.
Yeah.
So yeah, just raise your hand and we'll point you out.
Thank you, James, for the presentation. Question, when you talk about the 16 different organizations, I'm sure there were more than just 16, right?
Oh, yeah.
How did you go about consolidating all those resources? Because to me, that would seem like a major challenge to get all of these, probably initially silos, into alignment so there's synergy and you're all headed in the same direction.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would have worked as well if it wasn't county government. So we were able to get into rooms that other folks weren't able to get into, certainly with our criminal justice partners, but also our healthcare partners. We had those existing relationships. Sometimes it's hard for, a nonprofit to try to end homelessness and you can't get in those institutional rooms. But again, I've kind of mentioned the short-term and the long-term goals. We were able to demonstrate very quickly a visual difference in downtown Milwaukee based on our Housing First initiative. So we announced what this public thing was going to be, this new way of looking at it, and people saw in real time that reduction in homelessness, and it piqued their interest about how to do it. And then we kind of gained the partners from there. And we did have to get over some of the mistrust in government. So government running these programs, government's not going to work, it's too bureaucratic. So really building on our success, showing that even though my team of outreach workers works for a government, they sure don't look like it. They look like nonprofit workers. And I think we bought a lot of credibility with that, having the individuals we serve come along with us to those meetings, hearing things from their perspective certainly helped.
Thank you again. A very excellent presentation. Sometimes a little fast for me, but
Yeah, sorry.
so is there a resource of information on national new homelessness, by year, and even for better than that, by region?
There is. It's a little hard to digest, but if you Googled HUD point in time numbers, so every community that receives HUD funding, which is all of them, does what's called point in time. So when you look at our homelessness numbers, you're mandated by the federal government that you're doing a count of where you are year to year in homelessness, and they publish that data. So if you just Google point in time statistics, every community in the United States is going to be reporting that all in one centralized area.
Okay. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that you felt that your housing authority was unique. Could you compare and contrast what was unique about you as compared to the Grand Forks Housing Authority, which I know a little bit about?
Oh, excellent. So a lot of it was sometimes housing authorities get a little scared about what it means to do a true housing first type program and entry into a housing authority. Those that are owning public housing and doing asset management, even ones that are doing voucher programs, how is this going to work? And we don't have the staff to manage a separate homeless waiting list and all those different types of things. Working through that on our side, we were really able to argue it's actually way easier to do it this way. So we had the ability, again, being the housing director, but also the executive director of our housing authority within the same structure. We wrote our admin plan specifically for the benefit of homeless individuals. And we changed that plan word for word to where we knew it would work best for the system. Again, we chose homelessness to kind of be our area of focus. Housing, that's not the business of a housing authority to necessarily think like that. But I think you can build a system where, individuals and service workers, we can take that burden off of housing authorities and make it way easier for you, where a lot of staff might think that that's burdensome. So it was really about our administrative plan really focuses on homelessness and giving us the most flexibility that we could possibly have.
Thank you very much.
To piggyback after that comment, we have four housing authorities in the metro area here, which is a little bit unique and different. We just have a single housing authority for Milwaukee County.
Great question. So we have two housing authorities. We have our county housing authority and the city housing authority. Our housing authority, we have about 2,000 vouchers. The city's housing authority has about 6,000 vouchers. It took many, many years for them to agree to a homeless preference, but they have one now. And, we pressured them to do that. And they were worried about some of these things, the same things I was talking about. So even to the point where we would say, we'll do all the paperwork, we'll do everything. I'll even inspect your units if we have to, just make them vouchers available to the folks that we're serving. And we finally have a partnership that starts to look like that. Our city housing authority actually is now labeled a trouble housing authority and will be outsourcing those vouchers. So if there's a way for us to get those vouchers, I'm very interested in that. But it did take years to get them comfortable with this idea of at least the set-aside units for homeless individuals. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Callie from the Fargo Youth Initiative, and I was wondering how the transition period off of this program goes to ensure financial stability so that they don't end up coming back to the program.
Yeah, good question. So again, when you look at all the ways, we're fortunate because we can run all these programs in-house from short-term to long-term. So our our biggest safety net is a housing authority voucher. And in theory, once you have one, it's there when you need it permanently. So there's certainly a lot of our clients that have transitioned off of their voucher. They got jobs and they don't meet income requirements. We have a home ownership program now in our Section 8 program where you can actually use your voucher for a mortgage payment. And a lot of the houses that we built around our human services facility will be targeted to individuals in our rent assistance program that can then use their voucher payment for their first house. So it's kind of that move on initiative that I talk about. You're going to move somebody through your system to get them as independently as possibly can, but making sure that they still have that ultimate safety net.
Okay. And then my second question is, does this program also help people who are house poor?
Good question. So it certainly didn't at first till we finally had the money through United Way and our prevention initiatives. So that is what some of our housing geeks would call category 2 homelessness, right? So the amount of homeless individuals that are going couch to couch that are in awful housing situations in the thousands in both of our communities. And we don't get a chance to see that, so it's hard to quantify. And federal funding is generally going to go towards sheltered or unsheltered folks, and we can't get to that group of individuals. That's where the prevention funding and United Way's money came in. Most communities do not have the resources to even get that far upstream. But once you start through prevention dollars is finally what we're able to do with it, especially right to counsel, stopping eviction proceedings and doing back rent and things like that. It's really the first time we got a chance to do that.
Hey, awesome presentation.
Thank you.
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
When it comes to utilizing vouchers, it's specifically for potential tenants or, as you mentioned, people at risk for becoming homeless?
Sure.
How do you actually track that? Is it mostly digitally, physically, and is that something that's going to be publicly available as data for everybody to know exactly how these vouchers are being utilized?
Great question. So we don't set aside a certain percentage of our vouchers for homelessness. HUD's going to let us determine that as we want to. but it is a big focus of ours. We do enter our data into our homeless database, which is rare for a housing authority to do that. So we are tracking all of that data from an individual's homelessness. Even there once in their housing, we still track all that data and what that looks like. That's not mandatory in housing authorities. We don't have to do it that way, but we track it that way. So really what the idea was I mentioned earlier, is to give our homeless outreach team as much direct access to our housing authority vouchers as possible in real time. That was the biggest difference that we did. So the way that when we had our HUD audit, was one of my favorite audits in our housing authority. So it sounds crazy, but it was amazing. Our local HUD office is fantastic. So they loved our homeless preference and said that was great work. And I said, yeah, I just wish our coordinated injury system was faster and this worked better. And they're like, well, why do you care about that? I'm like, because you do. And no, we don't. Like, don't you have your own homeless outreach staff? Yeah, we do. Well, shouldn't they determine who's homeless? Yeah. They're like, we don't care about those definitions. You guys house whoever you want to house and you determine that. And it was like, oh my God. Our outreach team just lost their mind because it completely changed the flexibility of our housing authority that we didn't even know we had. That was just a year ago.
Then this following question. So we can see that the socioeconomic landscape across the globe is, there's a lot to be desired. And it looks like we've been seeing a lot more layoffs, especially due to technology. When it comes to those who are homeless or destitute, and they end up going through this program, do you also take into account potential upskilling they may need in order to participate in the new emerging economic system?
Good question. We actually talked a little bit about that this morning. So, when you're first starting out talking about chronic homelessness, I would say 100% of the clients we serve have pretty severe mental health issues and addiction issues and aren't necessarily ready for that employment conversation yet. When you look at chronic homelessness, at least in our community, that's who we serve. Communities, including ours, don't have the greatest employment programs to transition folks even out of all of these systems into employment. So I will admit we don't even do a great job of that. It's communities across the country don't have really good job training programs because the funding is really hard to get for those. So if there's one thing I wish we did better at, it was exactly what you asked. So we haven't really fully developed what that looks like yet. We've certainly done relationships with employers. As an example, all the maintenance and everything in our government office building is all done through a job training program and not county staff, the way that a lot of other departments do it. So we're doing our best to be able to do that, work with local businesses, mental health agencies that do job training to get at that. When we're looking at chronic homelessness, though, it's individuals that aren't even ready for that stage yet. So thank you for questions.
Recently, we have tried to hold master leases with one of the landlords here in our community, and they're telling us that it's against fair housing or fair housing issue to not run background checks. Can you give us any language or any tips to use to help advocate for agencies holding those master leases?
Yeah, it sounds like you might need a new landlord. And it depends how those units might have been funded, if it's tax credits and all, there's all kinds of different rules with that. But no, our master lease, we're the tenant. My division's the tenant. Master lease only works if the master lease holder has the ability to move in whoever they want. That's why we do master lease units. At that same time, though, with our landlord engagement coordinator, landlords are really important to our work. We are going to be upfront, even though we don't have to, about a client may have particular challenges. We're going to make the landlord aware of that because we want to be a good tenant as well. But no, that is certainly not the case. The only way that that's not the case is every community has most likely local ordinances with registered sex offenders, as an example, with a certain amount of feet from a school and things like that. That's the only circumstance I could think of where that would be true. Sorry.
Is it him or me? Okay, I guess it's me.
Yeah.
Had a question for you too. Have you been to Bismarck yet?
No. Tell me
All
about
right.
Bismarck.
Well, this is a great presentation. I think you need to present that to Bismarck, to the state capitol as well as Fargo.
Oh, excellent.
The people will understand why. My question is, though, we have an administration nationally that's in the crossroads between who we may be choosing for president, and that's going to dictate how things are happening in the state level. Is these funds going to be changed up or switched up if a certain president does get elected? And how would that affect this state, which is considered a red state?
Sure. Great question. Yes, we have had that discussion, and even a really good discussion this morning, actually, about the same thing. And it goes back to if this is really done correctly, homelessness should not be politicized. We can all agree that everybody wants to reduce homelessness, so let's hold each other accountable to that outcome. There are certainly housing first detractors, and unfortunately what it is it's debate about, you know, what happens in California and San Francisco and LA, which is not Fargo. And they say, well, the federal government adopted housing first and it doesn't work over there, therefore X, Y, and Z. And that is not at all how this works. So we're certainly, we're a little worried about the potential shift away from housing first. But Fargo, just like Milwaukee, can be the test case. We have to show that this stuff works. And we have to show reductions in homelessness. That is the housing first arsenal that we have to show that it works. But we have that discussion all the time. This is a big year for a program like Housing First. Those of you that are going to be in the audience tonight, there's a really important documentary film that's coming out in April about the solution to homelessness. And it's focused on Housing First, and it's going to lead to a lot of national conversations about data and what this looks like. But yes, that is without question a current topic for our programs. Up front here. Oh, next.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. Chris Theory, Cass County Veteran Service Officer. I noticed that your presentation never said veteran in it. I just had a couple questions regarding that.
Yeah.
And then one of your slides had gaps. We're really struggling right now with veteran homelessness and trying to fill in those gaps. You know, i.e. shelters are full, the VA is full. We have a wonderful staff here, a lot of people engaged on the street trying to help veterans too. I know homelessness is homelessness, but we're a unique group. Some of us are a little outspoken than others. Do you know any grants or anything that could propel us to end those gaps?
Sure. Not sure who, if anybody has VASH vouchers. I'm sure you know about the VASH program. I'm not sure if there's VASH vouchers available. To be honest, the reason that's not my presentation, we don't run veteran-specific programs because we don't see any veterans in shelter or on the streets anymore in Milwaukee, so we don't really focus on that. But yeah, so much so that our community even struggles to use its VASH vouchers. But that's the best example for us, would be VASH vouchers. Do you guys have access to those? Not enough though, or?
Well, we're running into where the shelter's full or housing's not available at that time. And we're trying to fill the gaps with, you know, trying to help a veteran stay in a hotel, but it's just not, you know, we don't have the funding for it. So I was wondering if there's any grants that you know of, or, you know, the mom and pop donation doesn't really work anymore. We have a beautiful community. Like, you put anything on Facebook, we got a sleeping bag the other day. I was like, hey, we need a sleeping bag for a veteran. But at the same point, we need to house them too and make sure that they don't. I know we've had a milder winter, but, you know, Salvation Army, for example, they're seeing a lot more folks even last year with our winter. So it's just kind of an ongoing problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, what I would suggest, I don't think even the end of tomorrow, like this is kind of it was described, this is kind of the catalyst of what can come next in Fargo. Be at the table to advocate for veterans. This will not be the last community meeting. Things will happen here. So I would be at the table for that conversation for any of you, but veterans, especially if you're seeing a gap that can't be filled with federal resources, that should be a part of this community conversation.
Hello, thank you for your time and your presentation. Liked the housing equals healthcare slide. However, I wanted to elevate that, a lot of the homeless in our area, and I'm sure we're not unique, are not only elderly now, but they're complex medically. And some that we're bringing off of the streets right now don't even have capacity. So I'm wondering if you can speak to any of those challenges that you've had and what resources you've had to add or bring in. I mean, we're having to put people into skilled nursing facilities directly off the streets. And so the housing part is actually getting majorly skipped.
Wow. So we definitely, I could do 85,000 slides on all this stuff. But the one thing we noticed when we started this program, the population we were serving was older because they were homeless for a really long time. Once we got to where we are now, we rarely would see somebody of advanced age that's homeless. It's younger people now. It took us several years to get there. It certainly helped talking about, county local government within Milwaukee County is also the aging department of Milwaukee County that we had that direct relationship with. So if we're in those situations, we can make an instant referral for aging services to get everything that they're covered with. But again, it's the same county government with pretty instant access to that service, harder in other communities. But our aging department was definitely one of our partners for those exact issues. Even if an individual wanted to live in their own apartment, had a case manager, couldn't manage it, and had to be in a more skilled facility or get in-home care, we would then partner with our aging department to bring that service in because that wouldn't be our area of expertise, but we had to have that partnership.
Okay, hi. I'm wondering more on your family homeless youth and kind of more of those numbers of how much you bring in to live. And then do they get any additional resources for schools or anything?
Yeah, so that was all really through United Way because we would have never had the money to be able to do that. So I hesitate to be wrong with the guess, but it was at least $14 million United Way brought in a very short amount of time to focus exactly on that population. And one of the things we noticed, certainly our youth shelters and youth advocates were very concerned about youth homelessness. What we found out with our data is most of those youth were being served in the family initiative of United Way that we didn't necessarily expect. So most of that work kind of was done by them, all kinds of different prevention programs and parenting programs and healthcare programs, just things that we would never be able to run or fund. That was all done through United Way, but I think it was about 14 million that they raised.
I think you earlier mentioned couch surfing people. Like in Grand Forks, we at Grand Forks Homes with the Housing Authority there developed a program, trial program to find housing for those families of the children, basically for the benefit of the children so they could have a stable education. And that was, been a very good program. It is challenging in that a lot of the families don't really qualify because of prior issues. And so we tried to come up with an alternate form of lease to try to get that done. HUD pushed back. And I think under there was a question about a master lease like you were talking about. It seemed like there are housing rules for the funds and certification of the people, that there was challenges, and this is probably a conversation I need to have with a technical person on your team, and so maybe you can answer in general and put me in touch with
Sure.
somebody on your team.
Sure. So maybe this goes to the previous question. Master leasing within a housing authority is going to be extraordinarily difficult. So our master lease money is just local tax levy money that is not affiliated with HUD or our housing authority. It's just a relationship between us and our landlord. I could see how it'd be very difficult for a housing authority to work through those different types of rules to do anything like that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Homes were nonprofit, and so, yeah, I guess we could, okay.
Oh, you're,
Yeah,
I thought you were part of the housing authority, I'm sorry.
now,
Okay.
on the board for Grand Forks Homes, which is a nonprofit developed about 50 years to help own, in a nonprofit way, low-income housing. And so we hired Grand Forks Housing Authority to run our properties,
Okay,
and that's decided yearly, but they have done such a good job that we have always rehired them.
okay.
But at any rate, yeah, so maybe somehow we have to get involved, but, yeah, we don't really have an income source. So going to have to really think out of the box.
Yeah, so maybe we can connect afterwards
Okay, thank you.
to go through your questions. Thank you very much.
How does this program incorporate the unintended youth who are yet too young to go into housing on their own?
That's a problem. So just based on all of the different regulations, unaccompanied youth under 18, that's a very different conversation. So a lot of that is going to be done by a lot of our youth shelters, figuring out how to move somebody who's under 18 into their own apartment with their own lease. That's not going to work very well. So that's definitely a little outside of our scope. Pathfinders is our local youth organization that handles a lot of that. It's typically done through their shelter and kind of their congregate group living situation. Unaccompanied youth under 18 typically are not going to be involved in the programs that you saw. It's usually going to be through an agency like that. But we did find, though, that a lot of those youth also were kind of served through United Way's Family Initiative, almost on accident from a data perspective. So we did at least get to do some of that work that way.
Hi, good afternoon. Good to be with you again. Taylor Sievertson from United Way of Cass Clay. I have a question about those that are exiting institutions, whether that's justice involvement or behavioral health or medical health care sorts of institutions, and what kinds of initiatives have been established to bridge that?
Good question. So years ago, Milwaukee County had an awful record on reentry housing. So we have the Milwaukee County Jail and the Milwaukee County House of Correction. What the county did many years ago for discharge planning is if you didn't have a housing plan, they gave you a ride on the bus and dropped you off by the courthouse and have a nice day. That was literally the discharge plan. Fast forwarding today, so we have a lot of shared situations. So our House of Correction, we embedded a housing navigator directly in our House of Correction. So the office is at the house. So we do housing discharge planning for individuals so they have affordable housing upon their release. So we work several weeks in advance of their discharge planning. So we're a part of the discharge planning team. The position is financially split between Human Services and the House of Corrections, so we kind of cost share with that. And then the healthcare initiatives has really been great. So they might even call us directly to an emergency room. Again, they're paying the salary for my team, so if we get the call, oftentimes we were doing placements directly from an emergency room situation into some of our housing programs. So yeah, we were unfortunately years late in getting the funding to do the reentry part the right way, and we got a long way to go to do reentry housing to really meet the needs that we see.
Good afternoon. Very tactical question for you. So that initial $1.5 million that you'd used to be able to stand up your program, what did that team look like to be able to get things moving?
As far from a political perspective?
From maybe an operational perspective, project management, change management, business leaders, team leaders, what did it look like to actually get your wheels to start to move?
Yeah, I was really, really fortunate. It was one meeting with the county executive's office. It was amazing to say so, but it really was. We came up with this plan, and his only question was, "You really think this is going to work?" Yeah, I think it's going to work. He said, "Better work." It was that one meeting, and then he supported it with, a resolution to our Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors. We had to get county board supervisors to adopt the funds for that program. And that was really it. And then we hired our housing navigators, and again, that program evaluator was really big for us, doing all of our data and our cost savings to prove to county leaders and healthcare leaders and behavioral health leaders that their money was well invested. That's really all it was to get us started. A true story.
Then what did that team look like later? So once you got past start and you got into operation development, how broad?
Yeah, we have, so our housing division went from 21 people to 67. So tremendous growth. A lot of that is in housing navigation and case management. Again, we brought some of that case management in-house. We weren't getting the results we really wanted from some of our partners. Yeah, we've had unbelievable support. And it's mostly political support from Milwaukee County, also the city as well. But we have the data to show that what we're doing has worked. So it's about 3 times the size of what it was when we started. And again, it's important to discuss the intersection of housing and healthcare is really kind of what our bread and butter is. We talk about that all the time. All the divisions around us in human services now want a housing navigator in their area to do housing, and that's where a lot of our growth came from.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hello, James. I'm Leticia with your Hello Road with Jeremiah program. So we support single moms who are in college. You touched on housing first and equity. Could you please elaborate on any data you may have related to the intersectionality of homelessness and race and perhaps gender?
Yes, thank you for that question. So when our county executive, David Crowley, took over, every single part of the county budget was under the lens of racial equity, everything, not just for homelessness, but our parks. Everything we did at Milwaukee County was under that lens. So that worked well for us because we had good data. So we're able to kind of prove what that looks like. So I mentioned in a previous slide, 24% African-American population in Milwaukee County, but our data showed 75 to 80% of our unsheltered homeless were African-American. That's a terrible statistic. So that certainly worked. Again, under the lens of racial equity, he's like, we have to fix that. If we didn't have good data, we wouldn't have been able to prove that. So that made a big difference in getting additional funding for homelessness because those numbers, frankly, were so awful. But that's exactly what he was trying to get to. And outside of housing, making sure that county parks that had pools would not close in African-American districts ahead of other ones. It was all of that conversation under that lens of racial equity.
You need a microphone.
Oh, no, I got it. She's asked kind of about data around gender and single women. So a majority of clients that we serve are single men. I'd have to get back to you on the exact breakdown of that. We might be anecdotally about 90% are single male for unsheltered homelessness in our community. We don't have any families that are unsheltered. Yeah, definitely under 10%, probably single females. And those that are get pretty quick access from a vulnerability perspective, pretty quick access to housing.
Hi, so I'm basically a case manager. I'm called a care coordinator. So I basically help homeless people get housed.
Yeah.
And there's about like 25 agencies that do care coordination just in the FM area. But it's a state program, so
Community Connect and Free Through Recovery. It's a whole statewide program, and that's basically one of the main areas we focus on. And part of the homeless population we do help are here illegally. What do you have any like suggestions of how to do with that? Because a lot of times we run into it where we struggle with getting them a green card or a visa where they're stuck.
Yes, we have struggled with that, not so much anymore. So the biggest problem with that, a lot of the federal resources we utilize, housing authority vouchers, are not going to be an option for undocumented individuals. That's what we use a lot of our local funding for. A lot of our master leases, we even have rental assistance programs that we pay for out of local county tax levy. That's how we do that. We have to use local funds to get at that. In our world, those individuals, you know, we're not going to have them unsheltered either. But that's what we have to do, is use local funding or philanthropic dollars to house those individuals, because they're generally not going to qualify for federal subsidies.
And then I have a second question. We do have a lot of big apartments coming up in like buildings in Fargo, but they're usually not going to accept the people we work with. So what do your developments look like? Are they apartments, townhomes, or the ones that you've built?
Yeah, so definitely a mix, but we're generally going, again, our landlord engagement coordinators, we're getting all these units. I find that our clients are living in buildings that I can't even believe they're living in, on the water and next to very high income tenants right next door. It's really about that landlord engagement. The other thing we do is we keep an eye on new affordable housing developments that we don't have a relationship with. And this is a little bit in the weeds, but when you're building affordable housing, each unit has a different kind of income criteria for it. So if we see somebody that got awarded tax credits and they're going to build something, we're going to find out their unit mix, and we're going to call them 9 months before they open and say, hey, if you take a voucher, if you take one of our vouchers and our clients and work with us through Housing First, I can actually pay more rent than you have in your pro forma, but you got to work with us. And we do that well in advance. So when those units come aboard, they're ready to work with us. They understand the program. So we hunt for landlords before they even find us a lot of the time. But we're usually ahead of the game because we follow the construction of the units, and we build really good landlord relationships that way. But we have to speak their language and know how to speak about it, tax credits and financing and all those different types of things. So it's more of a real estate conversation than a social work conversation.
Hi, James. Excuse me. My name is John Campbell with the Fargo-Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness. I had a couple of questions. One big long question. A recommendation. How do you see the collaboration effort of all those entities that you had named and all of us in the room here? How do you see that coming together? And do you or did you have a coalition working as you were going through your process and things like that? And what part did they play to keep things on track and help with that?
Good question. So I think it's a little more challenging in Fargo with just the way that all of your local cities are set up, and you're going to have a lot of those players working together. That's a little more challenging. I think the good news is we met with a lot of them this morning in the same room, and that conversation has already started. Milwaukee County was easier for us. It was City of Milwaukee, County of Milwaukee, but frankly, 98% of our homeless issues are in the city and not in the suburbs. So a lot of our suburban communities, you know, they were going to say, you know, we don't have homeless individuals, but we did control all of their block grant funds. So all of those suburban communities received community development block grant through us. And at least we, in order to get those funds, we make them sign, you know, affirmatively furthering fair housing agreements and those different types of things where maybe they don't have homeless individuals, but we at least want you to expand your affordable housing options, and we're going to help you do that. But with us, it was a little easier. Just geographically, you guys have a lot more smaller players that all of them have to be a part of the same system. So that's a little bit harder here. It took us several years to really get our suburban communities really involved with housing, a lot of years. But they saw the same affordability crisis that the city was seeing. So we've done about 300 units of affordable housing in fairly affluent suburbs that would have never talked to us before. But it took years to be able to develop that relationship. We were finally able to do that. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Yeah.
All right, out of respect of James's time, we have about 10 minutes left. So anybody who is interested in asking a question, if you can raise your hand so we can get around to everyone, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi. So you've talked a lot about working with landlords. I saw one thing on the slide, and then you mentioned using vouchers to go from renting to paying a mortgage. And in the slide, talked about building low-income or cost-effective family homes.
Yeah.
How much focus is spent on that so that the money being used by these individuals, they can work towards saving an equity instead of it just going through them to the landlords?
Great question. We did not in our division, like we're generally kind of the ultimate safety net, did not do much homeownership until about 2 years ago through those ARPA funds. For that homeownership program, we got $6 million of ARPA funds from the state and partnered with Habitat for Humanity. That made a big difference because we are building smaller single-family homes that surround our human service facility. Those very small single-family homes, it's $300 and some thousand to build, and we're trying to sell those for under $150,000, which is fine with us. We wouldn't have been able to do that without that new federal batch of money. It's almost impossible to be able to do that. So we would have never had the money to do truly affordable single-family development until we got those funds. So we're doing that right now. And any housing authority can have a home ownership program within their rental assistance program. And it's really as simple as that. You can take your voucher and turn that into a mortgage payment instead of a rent payment. So those are the folks we're targeting with our home ownership opportunities. But it is very difficult to do instant home ownership affordably with single-family housing because of our current construction costs. So we've finally been able to get the funds to do that.
James, a question with about 1 million people, and you think about empathy. The McKinsey Group just put out a study. They're saying empathy across the country is on a downward trend, unfortunately. So when you think about that, when you started in 2014, how did you handle the change management? And I think of that picture right there. I think of the culture of the city of Milwaukee. And on that journey, how did you navigate through that, right? Because it sounds like you started out with a high number of folks that were homeless. You made a major pivot, which created a lot of change. And so how did you direct the change or facilitate the change or make that change?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us turned out to be our business district because she was an early adopter. And she ran the downtown business district, but was very, very empathetic and had a way of getting a message across that I couldn't get across. She was great. So it was about laser focusing on the business community to reduce homelessness. But because it worked and we got to educate the businesses on, Housing First is a very client-centered, empathetic approach. Once they knew it worked, the way that those businesses interact with homeless people is way different now than it was when we started because they know that it works. And a few of those big time business owners, they speak at all of our engagements. They could tell you everything about Housing First. Milwaukee is kind of Midwest nice, as Fargo kind of appears to be too. People generally want to do the right thing. But she was able to tell that message to a lot of our business owners who at first wouldn't have had much empathy for the people that we served. They weren't going to listen to me, but they would have listened to her. She was probably the biggest person that kind of turned this around from an empathy perspective. That's a great question.
Very practically, you mentioned the county of Milwaukee and the city of Milwaukee. Did the change happen from one direction or the other or both? Where was there hesitation? And as you think about getting to know our community a little bit, we have a state border down the middle with the Red River and lots of different communities. How would you recommend, that we move forward, or what are the challenges going to be there?
Yeah, the challenges are, again, it's harder here as I talked to folks this morning and just look at everybody's going to have to be a part of this plan, even the Minnesota folks on the other side of the river. That's going to take some work. A lot of communities across the country, you can't, even if it's 5 miles apart, we're in a different state. Well, you're part of the same community. So that has to be a shared vision, and that's going to take some work for everybody to do that. For us, maybe our county executive was just a little competitive. We were just going to do this, and kind of called the mayor and said, so we've got this plan we're going to announce. Hope you want to be a partner. And it was kind of like, well, wait for us. We were going to do it. So that's kind of, definitely started from a county perspective. But again, it was easy because the city of Milwaukee already ran the continuum of care. So it was pretty easy to get involved with them on that. But yeah, that's kind of how we decided.
If I can just interject here, and thank you, James, so much.
Yes.
Your message is very hopeful, even though this issue is complicated. I am walking away from this with a very strong sense of hope and encouragement. The response that we got this morning and now this afternoon tells me that the community is engaged on this issue, and it's so important to have that community involvement. So thank you so much for coming. Tonight, it sounds like an interesting session at 7 o'clock, Fargo Theater. It's a, a documentary, and then a panel discussion, as I understand, following that. So I'd encourage any and all of you to come to that. I think we talked about homelessness on one side is somewhat invisible when people are sheltered, and trying to keep that homelessness as infrequent as possible and as short-term as possible. Chronic homelessness, getting that down to 0. And based on what I'm hearing and seeing today, we can do this. So let's go out and get it done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate it.